The purpose of encountering God in a mystical way is not so that we can set aside our critical thinking, our harsh thoughts about how things are messed up and screwed up in the world. The purpose of having a mystical encounter with God is not to numb us to the suffering of the existential anxieties that we face in life every single day. No, the purpose of mystical encounters with God is to help us transcend those anxieties, to help us transcend the brokenness of the world, not to anesthetize us to them. And by transcending those anxieties and those broken wounds in the world around us, what we really often find is that our ability to think critically about the world and about life around us, far from going away or disappearing, sometimes that becomes sharpened and more attuned. Sometimes when we encounter God, we walk away from that encounter more critical than ever, more able to see piercingly through the obfuscations of a systemic society that is constantly pushing down the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized. No, sometimes encountering God means that we become more critical than we ever were, but we do it from a spirit of love because we've seen a vision of how things can be. And just like encounters with God can sharpen our critical thinking, also encounters with God, far from eliminating our suffering, can sometimes turn up the volume on our suffering. Because when we have encountered God, rather than doing away with suffering, we encounter the person who created the universe, who created you and me. And because God created you and me, God suffers with us because God loves us. And when we encounter the suffering, crucified God, that often means that we suffer right alongside him. And yet, there, alongside our sharpened capacity for critical thinking, alongside our increased empathy for the suffering of those around us, along with that does come the joy of the future that God has promised, the peace of knowing and trusting that as we cooperate with God's Spirit, that future will come about and will not delay. That, I think, is what all true encounters with God have in common. And so, if you have felt like you have encountered God in some way, but the end result is that you simply have unplugged from the harsh realities of life, you've become blissfully unaware of the suffering that's going on around you, then don't be surprised when I come along and tap your shoulder and ask if you really encountered God at all.